disruptive, an iPhone. It's proprietary. You know, it's owned by Steve Jobs, and he effectively has held that in a proprietary state. Bill Gates, Microsoft, proprietary innovation. For the first time, we actually have next generation internet technologies that is a people's technology. So when I met Katrina, I was like, if you are digitally curious, then become digitally intelligent, and you can do that. Just Google the shit out stuff, you know, spend some time, put down Sudoku and go learn things. And you've actually got the ability to tool this for yourself if you have the inclination to do so. And so this is an incredible time to be here. And then the awards are kind of just the byproduct of actually, we did one thing well. You know, I've had experiences in running companies and I've exited them. So I knew coming into Everledger that it was my last startup. I had to make that public declaration to my family, otherwise I wasn't allowed to leave the country. So that was a promise, it's a true promise. Otherwise I get nothing at Christmas. They keep testing me every year about this promise. And the second thing for me was to understand the commercial ramp of this and the timing of that ramp. And so I spent a lot of time understanding not necessarily the technology. Now, I've come from an engineering background, so it's inherent to me to understand it, but I spent an intense amount of time understanding the problem that we were solving and understanding then what was the technology doing to serve as a solution to that problem. So those that were with me through the Textiles Accelerator program, it's quite similar to this environment. You know, I spent the first 3 months taking every single research paper that was written about the diamond industry and sticking it on the wall, going at it like a serial killer, and I'm not joking, with highlights, pins, string, like the whole thing, and then seeing under white paper constructions what was happening beyond meetups, what was happening in the space at the blockchain end, and thought, we have an interrupt here, and the problems are so sufficiently large within the diamond industry or in supply chains that this is a critical moment in time that has to change. And if we put ourselves in that moment, imagine that future possible, imagine yourself in that moment, and then do whatever it takes to be in that moment, it's nearly like a sliding doors event. So if I didn't take the time to attend the startup, you know, Google Accelerator hackathon and make myself be present in that moment and enable what is future possible to today, I don't believe that Everledger probably would exist. And then the other big principle of that came out of it was to not listen to 3/4 of the people that you come across. Because they all have an opinion, but their opinion is only based on one optic view. And if you've come from a lived experience as a founder, as an entrepreneur, and you've had a lived experience within a certain industry, then for me that takes a lot more grounding in understanding where you need to be at the very first step towards the height of Everest, right? So, but often people like to read and understand that, yes, this is the theory of how you can attract the heights, but unless you've lived and walked through that experience under similar conditions, by the way, so you know you have to have this conditioned mind of being able to understand what's the environmental impact factors that you have to cater for and recalibrate, like a flight plan. You know, I'm quite sure I fly to Moscow tomorrow, and there's no way that that flight plan is going to stay as it's been theorised in their flight plan. There's going to be diversions all sorts of places. So having the mind to understand that's just a part of being entrepreneurial. That's a part of being in a startup. And in fact, that's a part of being a part of business. So I spent the first year, and one of the big dirty secrets of Everledger is the first year of Everledger was just me. We had no employees. So I started in April 2015, and between April 2015 and January 2016, just before I came back for Myriad, I spent the entirety of that year, you know, nearly 20 hours a day, coding, educating, being an evangelist, you know, being the secretary, because, and you know, I could have taken investment very early, but I decided not to. And I had a bit of criticism from some of those that like to sit on the sideline. And I said to them, no, hang on a minute. Like, yes, I could have employed a lot of people, but I'm doing actually the most important thing right now. And that is I'm doing the due diligence on my own thought, on my own company, and on my own product. And I'm doing that so that I'm not having to go through a process of hearing it third hand, fifth hand, and through the Chinese whisper filtering that often occurs. And so I live that. So I could come to this at the right time, making a full sense of decisions. And I think that has posed very well for us now, because we have a very, very strong culture within the organisation. We have big diversity. 44% of our team globally, are in female-led or female technical roles. That a project manager in our organisation needs to know what an endpoint of an API is, needs to understand what a Swagger file is. I mean, you can't be a project manager without some context of technical. But yet, our team hasn't always started there, but we created that environment to advance that. That was a really long answer to probably a very short question.
She just conflated every question I had into that response.
Good. Now you're going to have to think on your feet. No. You cheated with all these questions.
I did. It's interesting that you are saying that you're not a blockchain company, because it is a perception that out there that yes, it is. You are using the blockchain tech to federate or to create provenance. But I do have a question around, okay, if you're not using blockchain, well, let me rephrase that. This is the question I had. With so many blockchains emerging, i.e. public permissioned, private and permissioned, Everledger elected to build its technology with Hyperledger in partnership with IBM. So I'm curious to understand your reason for choosing enterprise distributed ledger technology so early in Everledger's development. Because I remember you making that announcement that you decided to partner with IBM, and obviously you would have done an enormous amount of due diligence about making sure that that was the right decision for you at the right time. And now where we're sitting in 2018, and I'm going to conflate another question into this just to give context, the Australian government have come out and said that IBM are now going to secure $100 million worth of Australian contracts around blockchain. And that has sent a ripple effect through the blockchain community in Australia, where we've all gone, whoa, how are we going to participate in this economy if we have big enterprises like IBM cleaning up these opportunities? So my question is what was your reason to choose Hyperledger, and is that still...
So look, this is a big conversation space, because you've just unpacked a whole bunch of stuff that we can talk about. So I'm going to try and touch on as much as I can, because diamonds is the one commodity that doesn't yet have financial products wrapped around it. There's no futures market yet, there's no ETFs, there's none of that. So Bloomberg might be quite happy about us, over the course of time. Why not an ICO? Firstly, in the very early stages, we just didn't need to raise money. I mean, why? We have customers, we've been revenue, we've been production, we're doing our thing, right? And we're balancing the toggle of that. And I think sometimes running into the space when you're a startup in emerging tech and running even through accelerators, it's all about the pitch and it's all about the raise. And so that was very frustrating to a lot of people in Techstars and through that early stage, because I just kept saying no, why do I need that? I don't need that. Yes, it's nice to have, but what am I going to do with that money right now? Because there was no timing. The timing at that point in time was all about education and building MVPs and getting the feedback from market. And I only need $10 million to do that. I mean, I need a couple of really good Qantas flights. If I use the points enough, I can lie down on a business class flight. But the reality is, you can do it really cheaply if you choose to. ICOs in the very early stages, the reputation is one. When you think about the customers that we have and the industry that we work in and the trust that is embedded within Everledger to do what we're doing, we take that very heavily at the very core. The purpose of our business is to ensure that we're aligned deeply in trust, and we can't compromise that at any level. And so that was the first part. The second part is just the governance, or the lack of governance, or the lack of understanding and the confusion around all of ICOs. What is it? Where does it place? How's that working? We just didn't want to take that as a risk profile. There's enough risk that we bear inside of startups on a daily basis. Why invite more into your life? So we didn't need to, we didn't want to, and I'm glad we didn't. Now, that's not to say that we don't believe that there isn't a place for ICOs, and we heavily support those that we think have some substance. And so we've sat as a technology layer to support those ICOs that might be participating in the space of the physical world of goods, for example, like Sping. Yeah. And some of the ICOs that are coming into the diamond space now, they're starting to think about diamonds as an asset class and how do you trade it, and is there a diamond-backed cryptocurrency and all that good stuff. Well, at some point in time, someone needs to know where the diamonds are and how much it is and are they real, and so that's the layer that we provide for.
It's so good to hear this, because I think some of us in this audience, every month when we get together as a community, whether it be through the Ethereum or through the Bitcoin blockchain or through here, we're constantly getting asked, when's your next ICO, who's going to do an ICO, and we're very aligned. We're like, it is risky, depends on who you're working with as a customer, and we work with governments, so there's no way we're going to do an ICO, we've always held that. But it's nice to hear, because there's just so much noise out there saying that you must do this, and then we're always wondering, well, where's the value? Who's actually generating these assets to say that they exist for trading, and the underlying crypto or whatever's sitting underneath it? It's very, very frustrating.
I was with the founders a couple of weeks ago in Switzerland from Crypto Kitties. It's incredible, those guys, what they've done. It's just the thinking around that, I thought, but they're serious. They're serious business guys. When you sit with them, they've got full economic modelling. They know, when you breed the cat, this cat does this. I'm thinking, this is incredible. But for me, I just don't know how I'd get too excited about Crypto Kitties. Like, I'd rather do that with something that's sort of real. But that shit's real. That's some serious money they've raised.
I know it's serious real, but it still clogs up the bloody network, So.
That's because you're on Ethereum. You need to be on.
Touche. All right, last question, and then I really want the room to have a moment to ask Leanne questions, because she's only here short times. And you mentioned, we know that you do travel extensively, because I follow you on LinkedIn and blah. And you do now employ 50 people.
60.
Well, yeah, and I was just about to say, with more people coming on board. So Everledger is very, very proud of its diverse workforce. So what would you like to say in response to the global media reporting that is continually saying that there is no women in blockchain, which we're so tired of hearing about? So you recently had an article written about that subject, and I know this is close to our hearts, because look at this room. We are here, we are working on the tech in different ways. So how do you respond when people say, Leanne, there's no women in the blockchain, you're so unusual?
Who cares? Ask me a better question, right?
I know, and that's
the truth. Who really cares? I asked this question in the room. There's two sides to this. First, who cares? This is like a first world blockchain problem?
No.
We've got other things that we should be thinking about.
I agree. I guess our retort is always saying, well, come and ask us what we're building. Don't tell us we don't exist. Just come and be curious about what we're building and the problems we're solving, rather than pointing out that we don't exist. So it's a really boring, lazy question, and we've just had to go through it with the Australian, and I've just done a whole thing with the Australian Financial Review, because I'm so tired of hearing that.
But it happens everywhere, whether it's the women in sport, whether it's women in blockchain, whether it's, whatever. I just think it's a crazy question in the media, and if that's what they've got to spend their time on, then, change papers. But the other part is, it was interesting, when you sit in a room and you ask people to put their hands up and say, who is not in a technical role today that wants to be in a technical role, put your hands up. And I remember I was in a room actually here in Brisbane, over at the Powerhouse, and I asked this question, and it was 2% of the people in the room put their hand up. And then the next question I asked was, well, what have you done about taking the first step towards that? Have you taken the time for yourself to go into your boss's room and ask them, look, I want to spend 10% of my time exploring this from a technical standpoint. Have you proactively moved forward? And hands came down, right? So that not everyone wants to be in this space. Not everyone wants to, be a nerd. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be.
Well, thank you, Leanne. I want to hand this to the room, because I'm sure there's questions everywhere, so the hands are going to come up. So where's Joe? Joe, would you be so kind to take the microphone around for me? Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Hello. My name's Anissa and I'm from Fair and Square, and we are a construction payments platform. So I have spoken to you about this, Katrina, and she wants me to get off the fence. So we are seriously looking at how our business would use blockchain technology to reduce the amount of fraudulent construction payments. So we know that there is a problem. We know that potentially blockchain could be a solution. What made you decide that blockchain was your solution? Because we could just go digital. What was the tipping point for you to say blockchain's our thing?
So there was a couple of things that the reasons why we chose it and the reason why we became embedded so quickly. Firstly, the diamond industry. Firstly, we could take a diamond, and each diamond is unique, so we knew we could digitise that uniquely by its very characteristics as an item, and that's really important, I think, in supply chains, rather than just putting a serial number on something or trying to track that. You have to have this thing called a PUF, a physical unclonable feature, and diamonds had that. The second part was, and so we knew that we could do that uniquely, so therefore every asset was unique and every digital record could be connected to that. The second part was to understand the size of the problems within industry, and did those problems uniquely reside within silos, or could those problems be solved through an orchestration of data across a business network? So if you brought together the parties, the multiple parties involved, in very simply tracking a diamond from the mine to the diamond manufacturer to the cutter to the polisher to the certificate house to the retailer, and if we had 6 of those people together that all said, yep, we all have a vested interest in knowing that, when I take it from the left hand to the right hand, a very simple line, and if we had the gauge of that answer saying yes, then we knew that we could get a bigger business network orchestration event happening, which is really, really important. The second part, so therefore there was a vested interest in every single person across that chain to solve for that problem, because they were invested in solving parts of their own pain points in the connection, I help you, you help me, so therefore risk is reduced. The most important one is actually the people system that involves the diamond industry. The United Nations came together in the year 2000, created the Kimberley process, 3-step validation system, and created a global network and a governance model that enabled consensus. Really boring meetings. It's like the United Nations. You rock up, everyone's got their little country flag and with the little headsets and all that sort of stuff, and permission to talk and all that crap. But what's really important about the governance structure of every country, and there's 81 countries in the world that have been practicing this since 2003, that human people system that exists, that is the overarching governance network of the movement of rough diamonds, is digitally applicable to the consensus methodologies within blockchain. So when I look to myself, I say, hang on a minute, you can uniquely deal with a diamond, you can put it on a chain and there's pain points siloed, and collectively if they join together they all have a vested interest in solving those problems. That translates into money, time, a reputation for them, because brand is very important in industry. But more importantly, we've seen companies like R3 come into the space, who's run around the banks and said, guys, you are the biggest competitor to this one, but you've got to play nicely together because it's really important. And let's get a consortium and let's work out how you can all be friends. Then let's work out how you can all work together to form a governance model. And it's going to take forever. Because the reality is, they don't want to play together. They've never actually learned how to play in a nice sandpit together. The diamond industry does that. So we had that base operating rule framework in place in a human system that I just knew that we could walk into, and didn't have to re-educate them or re-convince them that they have to change the way that they already within their own systems embed trust. So all of the combination of all that together, besides the fact that it's a nascent technology on a startup in an emerging space. You want to solve for a niche market, so pick a niche, and you need to solve a bloody big niche. And so pick one that's big, not one that's 10 million, one that's in the billions, if not trillions, and then you have addressable, sizable market. So payments is interesting because what are you solving for there? Are you solving for payments in a way that you're introducing cryptocurrency and that's going to be now the currency of choice? Or are you just trying to solve for it from a point of view of tea time settlements across borders? Is it, And you have to be very mindful around what's happening in existing networks of power. For example, Swift, what are they doing in open transfers and the introduction of new data layers to enable these types of problems to be solved well beyond the construction industry? Because believe it or not, anti-money laundering and terrorist-funded activities is a bloody big problem. So there are massive governments, massive existing frameworks in fiat that are focused on that in a significant way. So that, again, a really long answer, but you probably gleaned a lot out of my answer, and hopefully that was helpful. Okay.
Hi, Leanne.
How you going?
I don't need a mic.
Good pub voice.
Tim Goodman. I'm interested to hear about Everledger's revenue model.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to share. And it's a really important point to glean, because when we think about startups, you've got to run to revenue. That's the very first point. Run to MVP, minimum viable product, or run to revenue, and prove that, and then iterate. Iterate revenue model, iterate product. Again, we're very sport for choice. Thank you for the diamond industry. Again, another reason why we chose it. Diamonds have grading or certifications that are an imperative in the movement of diamonds across borders. So a rough diamond that has a Kimberley certificate must have a certificate with that diamond as it crosses the border, and that it will cross many borders by the time that it actually ends up in a retail network. Those Kimberley certificates are anywhere between $5 if you're paying in Singapore, or £30 if you're paying in the UK. And that baseline certification is all paper-based. And it's nearly like a raffle ticket system. It's actually a chit of paper, and you tear it off, and then you put the diamond with the container with the diamond, and then it runs across the network, and the other guy gets the other bit of paper and then glues it together and says 2 bits come together. Great. And there's the validation system. We digitally transform that, and we become a zero-sum game, because we know and understand the friction and the cost of paper. This is not necessarily digitisation in its first form, but this is the fact that we know that as that paper gets completely removed, they're saving the friction in the supply chain, but it doesn't really cost industry anything for us, because they're already paying for this. It's already baked into the cost model. And then a diamond will be cut and polished, and again, another certificate or a grading report is issued, and that grading report is anywhere between $80 up to, dependent upon the value of the stone. So it could be upward of $2,000 for a certificate. And again, that's a zero-sum game. So through the life of a diamond, it could be graded or have associated certificates, 10 in its life. So it's not just a one-time identification fee, it's a continuous identification, because what I recognised was certificates or grading reports is the currency of our industry. So when we go to a retail network and a diamond is produced, it relies upon the grading report to enable the value, or firstly the identity of that stone, and then attributes the pricing of that stone based on the attributes of that diamond. So it becomes the certificate of value. It becomes the currency. And so, just like a cryptocurrency, we're like a paper currency, but on the chain.
So do you take a fee every time there's a change to the information on your platform?
So we take a fee on the grading, and we take a fee on the chain of ownership, correct. And we've never had a registry of ownership within the diamond industry, but we have had registries exist in motor vehicle, for example. So if a car was stolen, you have the ability to know if it's been in an accident, if it's been written off, if that ownership has changed. And there's government departments that help to manage that. There's no such thing in the world for diamonds, and we recognise that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I can speak loud. Thank you for sharing that, Leanne. My name is Javeri. My name is Javeri, and my dad used to be a diamond broker back in the day. And he would always tell me how, the industry is so characterized by strong trust and family values, and they don't really let outsiders in very easily. And so I was quite interested in understanding, what your journey was in that, and how you made inroads, and whether you faced any difficulties and how you kind of broke them down.
Sure. So I began understanding the diamond and jewellery industry in 2007. And became an alumni with the GIA, which is the Gemological Institute of America. And so one could say that I innovated from within. So when I when I came to the participants of industry, I could talk in diamond technical language and inside the construct of the commercial industry and what was happening there, as well as the nerd level. So where we often find some, technical geniuses within blockchain look at it purely from one landscape and one landscape alone, and that's from, the distributed ledger level, but lack to a certain extent sometimes that deep construct of industry. So you are right, it's a very incestuous, maybe is the wrong word. You probably shouldn't use that word, but it's the only word I can use because I'm of very poor education. So I really shouldn't use that word. So you could probably edit that. It's very paternity driven, but it's changing. So if you think about the power of De Beers being, 80% of the market is no longer the case today. They represent, less than 30% of global supply. And even within the last 2 weeks decided that they will focus on synthetic diamonds. It's given us the perfect positioning now to enable even further growth for Everledger, because the industry wants to preserve rough. They want to preserve natural stones. They want to do the right thing rather than all moving across into synthetics. Oh, and what's really important is that this actually. Everledger sees ourselves as the Intel inside, right? So we're an ingredient brand. We want to humbly sit there, allow those that are brand facing, that do the right thing for as an example, the GIA. We don't need to be that front-facing trust brand, but we need to be the trusted industry, and we understood that very early, and we position ourselves in that way, and we will forever position ourselves in that way. So we will put ourselves in a place that we can provide that trust layer so that they can enable the brand of trust out to the market. And we've seen some incredible companies being born out of ingredient branding. So this is the place for me that I get very excited about it. The placement of Intel as a brand against a Dell laptop is something in the early stages of trust buying. You would say, I trust in Intel. So people are trusting in Everledger. Beyond the diamond industry too, by the way. So, we're in coloured gemstones, wine, art, and we did a fair bit of work. We were just awarded 2018 Tech Pioneer for the World Economic Forum, which is a pretty big deal. We're leading a lot of the technical work in the space for the Global Battery Alliance, because I saw and recognised what could be the most important supply chain in the world by 2030 and 2050, and it's stored energy. And so we're heavily focused in that space. You'll see a lot more work that we're doing here in Australia in alignment with that. And that's, for me, that's really exciting. That's the place that we want to be, is in sustainability, and what does that mean?
Hi Leanne, Amanda Rogers. In that article about women in blockchain that I read last week, I loved what you said just about sort of the Australian component of where you come from in DNA. So apologies, this is not a blockchain question, but how do you view that the way that Australians tend to punch above their weight, and how do you feel that's been a real asset for you in this space or in previous ventures, or is that just part of you and the nerd flag and everything else?
Yeah, I mean, coming from Brisbane and then being in some of these large markets is completely surprising to me. Like the other day I was in the London Stock Exchange, and it's literally walk around the corner and you walk into the London Stock Exchange. 10 years ago, if sitting here, I'd be like, wow, the London Stock Exchange, oh my God. But these markets, and I still have that. I have that excitement as a small child with the realization that we're at this pinnacle point of change across the globe. But there's something that's very real about being Australian, right? The fact that we are not shy of hard work, that we are able to find a work-life balance. And work-life balance doesn't mean 50%, 50%. It's finding the equilibrium for yourself. And I think we do that quite grounded. And I also think we just call it real. And so I don't often see that in some constructs of the world market. And I also think, like, a part of it is we give it a go. And that's 3/4 of the struggle for most, is that they're either not enabled to give it a go, through the kindness of others, or even just that dialogue doesn't even happen, which is why I said to her, get your shit together and why not, just start it. Yeah.
Might have one more.
So I'm not familiar with the IBM blockchain platform, so apologies if this is a stupid question, but how visible are the flows of diamond traffic to kind of external parties as they're happening on your platform? So I'm kind of thinking about it from a security point of view, as other parties can see, oh, this supplier has just moved X units of diamonds to that buyer.
Exactly right. Yeah. So there's no public. There is public visibility, but only post journey of the diamond. And we released that just recently at JCK, which is a big industry event. And you'll see a number of retailers. One retailer here in Australia that has that set of diamond movements in the palm of their hand at retailers here in the world. But real-time movement of goods is not available in public networks whatsoever, but the identity of that stone being available within the supply chain is there, but not the location of where that stone is. And you are right. We have a very deep police tech section to the company with connections back into Interpol and Europol. And so there is this sort of cross fabric of understanding anti-money laundering and certain types of funding movements, which is an important part as well. But no, we have to be very conscious of that. Particularly in the diamond industry, there's tiger kidnapping that goes on, which is there's a whole insurance section around tiger kidnapping. So people's families are literally taken off the street and it's a very real thing in our industry. Yeah. I can't wait for the day that someone tries to take me from the street.
You've got a blockchain.
It'll be like full state of origin will come out. The yelling Queenslander. More questions? Good.
So I'm not a professional, I don't work in blockchain, I'm just a law student. So I actually wanted to know, is there a specific field of law that your lawyers work in? I imagine it would be intellectual property, but perhaps governance and strategy and all that as well. And also, how would you describe the internal culture of Everledger?
So we have 2 in-house lawyers, actually three. We have 3. We have a general counsel that deals with general business matters and commercial matters. And in fact, one of our council leaders, she's been a commercial lawyer for many, many years, mum, 2 kids, returned back to work and now heads up our division in smart contracts. So really looked at how could we enable, real world common law moving into what we call pseudocode. So we trained her from her deconstruct of law to then how would you transform that across into pseudocode and transform that across into smart contract code. I think to be a lawyer in this particular time and to understand this technology and how you can place this is truly exciting. So do a double degree and don't go to movies on weekends and just start coding. Yeah, because the future is about you to a certain extent, because we're changing the way we completely bake in governance, bake in rules, bake in all sorts of things around transactional trust. So I think everyone has to have that baseline. So keep studying and writing code, by the way, too.
Internal culture.
Oh, internal culture. Whew. We're actually just about to message some stuff around internal culture. We our business now, we're across so many countries, it's incredible, just the cultural diversity. And I actually have 4 of our team with me here in Brisbane, one from Dublin, our Ireland office, one from Singapore, one from London, and one from Russia. And I guess the culture sort of resonates really at the DNA of who we are as people. We have this sort of internal joke about once you're in Everledger, you're a part of the Ever cult, so it's a bit like that. We each have everyone else's backs under a knowledge sharing way in one respect, but also that it's a relay race for us. We recognise it. We recognise that we have to change the baton at the end of Australia time to pass it off to India time to pass it off to London. And we run that race. We know day one I started this business as being a global startup, and I started this business knowing that we wanted a really good open culture where we could have free border movement of our people. And so that's a big focus for us. We work hard. We work hard and we play hard, but we also have a lot of fun doing it. But sometimes it gets exhausting because we feel the pressure of being up against transforming a 500-year-old industry, keeping really pragmatic about the things that matter, right? Not just kind of building another company for the sake of helping an industry make another $1 billion. What is really important? What is really important to each of us as individuals, each of us within regions, and then globally, and we are really focused on that. I am very much so. I say no a lot, and in fact, one of the pieces of work we're doing next year is about just the simplistic message of Everledger said no. So we said no because there were reasons around that, whether it be sustainability that didn't come up to standard or it wasn't even thought of, or that it wasn't of the right level of transparency. And so, for us, we're very brave and open about that. And that creates this really beautiful mess. It's like organised chaos. It's just like everywhere. We have this hashtag own it, which means if it's in your hand, you don't have to run the entire race, but you gotta sprint on the bat. If you've got the baton in your hand, that's a part of your responsibility, and run when you got the baton. Yeah.
Hi, I've got a quick question for you. What is the most surprising capability or skill that you've had to develop in your journey with Everledger that you didn't think about?
Not saying fuck as much as I want to. That's true. Just that hold back in moments where you really want to say what you really want to say, but you can't because you're at places of United Nations or you're in front of a camera and you can't say the word fuck. That ability to contextualise the importance of the message and know that also there is a time to speak, but more importantly, most of the time is to listen, and that's really been the moments for me that has been really important. But yeah, that's pretty much what it is actually, just to kind of dial my own personality back a little bit. And I'm actually quite an introverted person, but I've had to learn to be out the front in places that I don't necessarily feel comfortable in being. And there's all sorts of stuff that goes on there, right? The imposter syndrome and all those sorts of things. And I remember there was a keynote speech that IBM asked me to give, and I was like, no problems, I'll just talk about the diamond stuff and walk in the room. And one of the guys was with me, and he says, I was here last year. I saw Rick Springfield play, or whatever his name was. And there was 22,000 people in the room. So I was like, I just went straight to the waste paper basket. And I threw up in the corner because, that shit's real. No one trains you for that. No one trains you for that. So they're the things that are kind of really being quite difficult to, just to deal with.
Quick one. Consumption has never been driven more by brands than it is today. And particularly with the arrival of the dreaded millennial on the scene. So, with
That's interesting.
But anyway, with blockchain, I see one of the issues as the information that is uploaded to blockchain is only going to be as good as the brand that puts it there. Because in the old world, brands are trusted and brands are really hard to compete with. So if you're a startup and you're trying to build a business and you're using a blockchain platform, how do you compete with a brand who's trusted and you're not?
There's so much going on. So for me, I agree. Consumerism is killer. That those that are responsible for manufacturing, it's a race to the bottom. They have built 100-year-old brands, but they haven't necessarily built 100 years of those brands based on integrity. And there is a consciousness and a responsibility now when it comes to designing products, building products, that it must be baked in to understand what is the impact that product will have in 10 years time. So whether it is no more straws, that cup that you're drinking out of, how are we taking responsibility around that? So I think even more so today, there is a greater opportunity for startups and industrial designers to do that right, because no one is thinking about innovation from within product, within sustainability, and a consciousness beyond just the first consumer use. And that 100 years of nice logos is not going to last for another 100 years, in my opinion. And that we are in a place where that can become the biggest disruptive, and I will use the word disruptive, opportunity of those industrial designers or product designers on the planet today. And if you could bring the integrity of that through with a full consciousness of showing that transparency and really believing it, not just lip surfers putting lipstick on the pig but it's still a pig, but actually living and breathing that as the purpose, then you will start to see change happen in the world, and some of that change will leave some brands behind, if not die. And I was delighted. I was walking down New York just the other day, and I was so excited about Gap. I never normally get excited about Gap, but I got excited about Gap because they had a green, and I saw it on my eye. I was like, it's green, that's weird. It was green for good, and it was a single door next to their big crazy store, and it was a single door, and I walked in there, and it was a complete upcycling, full traceability on products with cotton tracing, etc., from start to finish. Now, it's only one door, and they've got thousands of doors, and it was one small door. But companies like that are leading the way on from a brand's level, but there are more important things to be focused on than just putting a nice door with a window and talking about it. It's those that are really digging in. And yeah, millennials, I mean, you guys are really hard to manage, by the way. It's like a tough one with this level of expectation of CEO tomorrow. But I do think that, thank God for the millennials, because they are absolutely making us question ourselves and what we did yesterday and the impact of what that means for tomorrow. And I think fantastic. Yeah.
I just need to get you on the list. I just have a question about the tracking of textiles. Do you think that NFC is the solution there, or I know there was a company, I think they're based in New York, and they're creating a special textile that they believe will be used for tracking textiles.
So NFC is just near field communication.
Yeah,
So it just enables you to communicate, in a near field. But no, I don't think that that's the answer for it. What I think is the answer for it is nanotech, right? The ability to be able to introduce an impurity but still maintain purity. We did a bit of work in this with a company called Brisbane. They're in Switzerland with emeralds. And of course, if you were to introduce an impurity into a stone, a precious stone like an emerald, you completely destroy the value of that stone. So we worked with ETH, a Switzerland university, to introduce a nanotech, so an immersion. You take the emerald, you immerse it, and that nano is actually kept within the fissures of the the fissures of the emerald, and then you can take the paternity test forward from that point. There is some work that we're doing, and you'll see it, in the space at a nanotech level in cotton. And there is an applied technology that is happening here, actually in Queensland, at that nanotech level for cotton tracing. Egyptian cotton is one of the biggest counterfeit goods. There's a lot of counterfeit goods in Egyptian cotton.
So that would have the scale that the manufacturer.
Of course, even at the grower. So, in the farm.
We've got one more question and then I'll have to wrap it up because I'm mindful it's lunchtime.
Cool. I won't hand the mic over when I'm done then. Hi, Tracy Kay. I've got a question for you. Moving into from diamonds in Everledger, and now you mentioned you're moving into different lines around validation of, say, wine, gems and other products. How much do you find, from a business and technology perspective, is reusable when you move into those different lines? And are you finding now that companies, when you meet with them, or industries, are looking to you to influence those business models that you've put into the diamond industry? to improve their actual provenance models?
So I think the principle is that we have procurement systems around the world, but we have no platform of provenance, and I recognise that this is what we need. We focused as a company on gems, metals and minerals. We want to look at opaque supply chains, and we want to be involved in conflict supply chains. So those supply chains that will have some form of human atrocity, we want to run into that like a fire in a building. So that's where we focus. So there are companies that are focusing in food traceability and tracking fish. For me, that's not really where we believe we can make the greatest impact. We are seeing now an awakening that people recognise that provenance is important across all supply chains, and actually it's missing. And that what we are seeing is those that came into the space early from a finance lens, we're really looking at blockchain being used for supply chain finance, bills of lading, digitisation. That really only goes so far to actually make an impact, and that doesn't necessarily touch those that are actually touching the product and the transformation of the economies. And so what we are seeing now is startups that have started in that supply chain space are now starting to rethink how they can go deeper. But we truckle-pigged our way around the world, and we wanted to do the hard yards first because we knew and understood that we were building a whole new construct rail network for ethical trade, and that upon that we will then know that financial markets will change, like green bonds as a prime example. You know, at the moment we've got green bonds being packaged up and written out. At best, they're khaki. I mean, they're all shades of brown and green mixed together. But new data has to come into the space, right, to enable those to truly become sustainable, green and true and transparent, not just digitising financial kind of constructs. We could have started there, but I mean, that's a bit boring. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know. Everyone keeps saying, we're not a startup anymore. We're in that conversation, so thank you very much for being here.